or you have a question, I would expect for you to ask me some questions so we can get this dialogue going and we can all be better for it. So don't feel shy. We have microphones throughout the room. If you have a question, we'll bring you a microphone so our online church family can chime in and ask questions too and feel fully a part. And with that, we're going to open up with a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this Sunday morning. We thank you for the opportunity to dive into your word and to learn more about what you are calling us to do in this season. We know that if we read your word from cover to cover, but if we don't apply it, it is not worth the reading that we've read. So we want to be doers of the word, not just readers or hearers of the word. So open up our spirits today, open up our minds so that we can take that next step in being active with the principles that you're showing us. And we're so excited about what you're going to uncover for us. And we ask all of these things in your son Jesus' name we pray. Amen, amen, and amen. For those of you who are joining in with us online, good morning to our online church family. So before we get started, a few questions. Who remembers what we've been talking about over the last 2 weeks? Anybody remember? Yes.
We're talking about Israel. Is it Israel rebuilding the wall? The temple. I'm sorry, the temple. The rebuilding of the temple.
Okay.
And they had the foundation done, and they celebrated because the foundation was completed.
Got it. Anybody else want to add to that? What have we been talking about over these past 2 Sunday mornings? Anybody else want to add to that? No, and there's really nothing else. Oh, go ahead. I can't hear you.
Testing. Okay. I think I'm getting it confused with
What's your answer?
the shovel, with people bringing the shovels but weren't actually there to help.
Yep, absolutely.
This was
We
this-
talked about that too. So the biblical story we've been talking about is the book of Ezra. And within that book, we're talking about the rebuilding of the temple. And as we've walked through that, we've kind of broken that down into a few different parts that should hopefully make it more applicable for you. We talked about actually what they did when they showed up and saw that the temple wasn't there. They first built the altar. They looked back on their life and repented of their sins. They looked forward and asked for consecration or blessing over their life for what they were about to do. And then they celebrated that small victory that the foundation of the temple had been laid. Then once they started making progress, then what happened? That's what she was talking about in the back of the room. Everyone who brings a shovel is not there to help you. And so last week we talked about when your enemies come in and try to throw off your progress. So we've been kind of walking through this topic of how in the world can you build something in your life. And how we make this relevant is some of us are building businesses, some of us are building lives, some of us are building families, some of us are building relationships with God. And so how in the world can you be successful at building something? Is everyone with me? Is everyone with me? All right,
Yes.
all right. So what we started out talking about, of course, and just to recap, we talked about what it looks like when you show up and there's nothing there. First, you build the altar. You have to first talk to God about, God, what in the world do you want me to do? What in the world do you want me to build? We all want to build stuff, and we all have all these ideas, and we want God to bless it, but some of the things we're trying to build are not in God's will. So making sure that we're aligned with God's will. Then, seeking God for direction for tomorrow. Where are we going? What in the world does he want us to do? What's the first step he's asking us to take? And then once we start taking those things and we reach those small victory points, how do we celebrate those things so we are actually celebrating the fact that we're moving forward? We're not just looking at the finish line. We're actually celebrating the steps that are going to get us there because it's the journey, not our eyes fixated on the destination, that are actually going to get us there. Does that make sense? And then we switched over to week 2. Week 2, we talked about the fact that everyone who shows up with a shovel isn't here to help you dig. And we said that your enemies aren't bothered by your lip service. So the more and more you talk about what you're doing, if you're not making any progress, they won't bother you at all. So we talked about some of us are living lives where it doesn't seem like anything's going wrong. There are no enemies. Everyone's on your team. Everyone has some pom-poms. And for people whose existence is like that, Well, maybe you ain't built nothing that's big enough for them to come against you. Maybe that's why you got so many friends, because you haven't built anything that anyone's going to come against you, because your enemies are not bothered by your lip service. Secondly, we talked about your enemies are trying to get beside you. We often think our enemies are standing on the other side of us, looking us in the eye. They're standing opposed from us. So we want to get there, and they're blocking our direction. Right. But in a lot of cases, the enemies aren't on the other side of you. The enemies are next to you. Right. Sometimes the enemies are in your house. Sometimes you're trying to build something, and the biggest thing coming against you are those family and friends who are supposed to be on your team. And so we talked about identifying those people, identifying people who say they want to be on your team, say they have the same vision that you have, but for some reason, every step they take is tearing down the same thing that you say you want to build. So if your words are saying you want to be with me, but your actions are tearing down the very thing God called me to, we're enemies. We're in the same house, but we're enemies in this area. And then I gave you a word of caution last week that just because you're an enemy for this particular goal doesn't mean you're an enemy in everything. I can still love you. We can still go out to lunch. We can still even talk about the future. But as it pertains to what God has called me to do in this area, you're an enemy towards this. You obviously aren't on the same team, because when you come around, it seems like everything's getting torn down to shreds. So you can't come in this area. But the rest of my life, we can go out and have a good time and have fun. But as it pertains to what God has called me to do in this circle, you're an enemy of this circle. And we talked about identifying those people. And today, we're hopefully going to finish that up, but we may end up having one more week of this. We're going to talk about what it looks like to finish building something. We often talk about what it looks like to actually start building. We talk about that we have hopes and dreams and faith that things are going to finish. But as we look at how we approach church these days, I don't even think we truly believe that we're going to finish. I don't think we truly believe we're going to get what we prayed for. I don't think we truly believe that God is going to come through for us. Because if you look at the topics that we teach, if you look at the moments we get excited about, it's always get ready. It's always God's going to answer. It's always God's coming. But when you look at the amount of teaching we receive to guide us through, once you get that thing, how do you keep it? It's a lot smaller than the teaching we get to stay prepared, the teaching we get to wait on it. And so what I want to dive into today, we spent the last 2 weeks talking about how to prepare for it, how to start building, how to deal with the enemies that are going to show up. But what I want to talk about today is once you get that thing built, what do those next few steps look like? How do you protect it? Once you get it off the ground, how do you protect it? How do you keep it? How do you make yourself fertile soil for God to continue to plant new blessings in your life? Are you going to be a one-trick pony, a one-shot hero where God gives you a blessing and you act up or you tear it up so bad that he's like, I ain't wasting my time over there anymore? So let's not be that person. Instead, let's be a person where we can actually be fertile soil for God to say, oh, when I blessed that, it multiplied. When I blessed that, it went to somebody else. When I blessed that, it impacted the entire community. So why not let us prepare ourselves to be fertile soil? So God would be crazy not to continue to bless you, because you have multiplication factions in your life, not simply division where you get something and you hold it to yourself. No. If you give me something, God, everybody's going to benefit from it. Yeah, we listen to that Kirk Franklin song, bless me, God, indeed. So what does it say? So everyone around me can have everything they need. So bless me. So everyone around me can have everything we need. Not just so I can live well and I can stun on people and look good, but so everything around me can have everyone we need. If we're going to be a people that God throws and pours blessings into, that's the key. That's the secret. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Does that make sense? I don't even know where I am in my notes, but we're going to get through this. All right, so let's open our word. We're going to read from Ezra chapter 6, and we're going to read from verse 13 to verse 22. How many of you studied your lesson this week?
Well, we're not doing this week. So.
Well, that's how I was going to tell. So we're actually a little bit behind where the book says we're supposed to be. So I'm sure that was God telling you not to read your lesson so you'll be prepared. We'll go with that answer, right? Ezra chapter 6, we're starting at verse 13 and going down to verse 22. Let's see. All right, it reads like this. Then, because of the decree of King Darius had sent, Tattenai, governor of Trans-Euphrates, and Shethar-Bazanye and their associates carried it out with diligence. Verse 14. So the elders of the Jews continued to build and prosper under the preaching of Haggai the prophet and Zechariah, a descendant of Edo. They finished building the temple. They finished what?
Building the temple.
They finished building the temple according to the commands of God of Israel, and the decrees of Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, king of Persia. So they finished, right? That's what we're trying to get to. Finishing, right? Somebody say finished. They finished. All right, verse 15. The temple was completed on the 3rd day of the month of Adar, in the 6th year of the reign of King Darius. Verse 16, this is what we're going to camp out for a while. Then the people of Israel, the priests, the Levites, and the rest of the exiles celebrated the dedication of the house of God with joy. Verse 17. The dedication of this house of God, they offered 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 male lambs as a sin offering for all of Israel, 12 male goats, one for each of the tribes of Israel. That's a lot of stuff. So 100 bulls, let's go back to that. 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 male lambs, and 12 male goats, one for every tribe. Verse 18. And they installed the priests in their divisions and the Levites in their groups for the service of God at Jerusalem, according to what is written in the book of Moses. Verse 19. On the 14th day of the first month, all the exiles celebrated the Passover, and that's where we're going to stop. So there are 3 things I want to show you, and we're going to camp out in verse 16 through verse 18. Let's go back to verse 16. I want to read these to you so they stick out in your mind. It says, then the people of Israel, the priests, the Levites, and the rest of the exiles, what did they do? What do you say? Celebrated what? The dedication of the house of God with sorrow, right?
No,
With joy. So all these people celebrated the dedication of the house of God with joy. Verse 17. For the dedication of this house of God, they offered, so they celebrated, they dedicated, then what did they do? They offered, right? 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 male lambs, and a sin offering for all of Israel, 12 male goats, one for each of the tribes. And then verse 18, what was the 4th step they did? They installed priests in their divisions. All right, those are going to be the 4 words we're going to work on today. So we're talking about what to do when we're finished, right? How do we move from finishing to actually keeping what God's given us? And there's 4 words I want you to remember that have stuck out. Number 1, they celebrated. Number 2, they dedicated. Number 3, they offered. And number 4, they installed. Celebrate, dedicate, offer, and install. The word tells us they celebrated the completion of the temple. They dedicated it to the Lord with joy. And for the dedication, they offered it to God, or they made an offering to God, and they installed priests for the service of God. How do we finish? What do we do when we finish? We celebrate, we dedicate, we offer, and we install. Celebrate, dedicate, offer, and install. You with me? Okay. All right, let's start breaking these down. First, we're going to go into celebrating. Now, you would think that celebrating is an easy one for us. You would think that, you do something good and we celebrate. But we have the faith to pray and we have the faith to wait, and sometimes we have the faith to believe. But once we get it, for whatever reason, whether it's out of fear of losing it, but whether it's out of fear of the other shoe dropping or fear of something going wrong, somehow it can steal our ability to celebrate. But we've been praying for something, and we've been in church and saying, God, I'm waiting. I have faith. I know what's going to happen. I'm going to praise you in advance. I'm going to do all of these things. We get it, but sometimes we allow getting it to discourage our ability to celebrate. We go from hoping for it and praying for it to now worrying about keeping it. We go from praying for it to now praying that we don't lose it. And sometimes we miss the entire process because we didn't end it off with celebrating. And you would think it's not that big of a deal. It's not bad if you don't celebrate your mountaintops. But let me tell you what that looks like and how that can result in you having a very difficult life. Let's say your life looks like a wave and you have mountaintop experiences, and on the other side of the mountain is what? A valley. So you're going back down, and on the other side of a valley is what? A mountain, and on the other side is what? A valley. So you're going up and down, right? But you're praying on the way up that you get it, and you get it, but you never celebrate it, so you never truly reach a top. So then you drop back down into a valley, and now you're back into another deep, dark, sad place. And now you're praying, trying to get out of it because you don't know how to celebrate. You never reach the mountaintop. So when you zoom out and look at your life just looks like a bunch of valleys tied back to back to back because you never took the time to celebrate the mountaintop. And so, although we've had these great moments, although God has come through, although God has been faithful to us, because we don't celebrate those moments, take a time and say, God, look what you did. Look what you pulled me out from. Yeah, it may not be where I want to be, but it's a whole lot better than the valley I was in, because you never take that moment. You allow yourself to just cut the top half of that wave off. And now you go from bad valley to somewhat bad valley, to bad valley to somewhat bad valley. And you never recognize or get to a mountaintop. And you wonder why you end up going into depression. Because your life just keeps looking bad to worse and bad to worse. And you never appreciate or recognize when things are actually going well in your life. So celebration is not just some footnote that we can sweep under the rug. We have to be able to recognize when God has done something for us so we can at least take that moment of pause and say, I made it. God answered that prayer. God came through, and through recognizing what God did in that season or in that moment, you now have a monument. You now have something you can look back on when that next valley comes, because that next valley is coming. But at least you can look back and say, I was on the mountaintop, versus not celebrating, not taking that moment and just continuously living in a bad place or living in a worrisome place or living in a place where you're more fearful of losing it, so much so you don't appreciate what God has done for you. Does that make sense to anybody? Is that anybody's life there? Now, that's one side of the coin where we haven't been good at celebrating. Right. But there's always another side of the coin, too, right? And some of us are too good at celebrating. But we celebrate too much. We celebrate every little thing. We sit there and say, we had a long week, so let me treat myself and celebrate. But we say, I'm still breathing today. Let me treat myself and celebrate. I've got 2 hands on my arms, therefore, let me celebrate. And I don't want you to think that celebrating is bad, because but we have to recognize that it's just one step in the process. Mm-hmm. See, the scripture shows us that after we celebrate, we go back to work. After we celebrate, we're back to work, reverencing God and going into the work step of dedication. It's not just celebrate just to celebrate and wait for the next celebration. It means that we celebrate, that's one step, but the next one is to go towards the work of looking at God and dedicating what it is that you're celebrating back to God. We're talking about building stuff, right? So you're celebrating the fact that you built something, whether it's just a foundation or whether it's the entire sanctuary, the entire temple that was built. But once it's built, okay, we celebrated, we had a good time, but now turn our attention back to God and dedicate it back to Him for His work. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now the question is, why is it necessary to move to the dedication step? We talked about celebration. Why is it necessary to dedicate something to God? Any thoughts there? Yes, ma'am.
Because it takes you out of it. It lets you know that you are recognizing that God has provided this versus you getting it on your own.
I like that. Anybody else want to add to that? We're gonna fix that in a minute. That's a part of it. That's a part of it. It's not wrong, but that's a part of it. Okay. All right. Anybody else? What you thinking? Why do we dedicate?
Because it belongs to God, and once we give it back, it's dedicated to Him.
There you go. Yeah, I like that answer. You want to add anything? Yeah. The only thing I want to change with your answer is dedication isn't necessarily talking about how you got here. You can give thanks to do that. Dedication is about the future. So I'm dedicating this to the work of the Lord, the purposes of the Lord. So you're not wrong. You should certainly, appreciate that it was God's work and not you. Yeah, but take it a step further. Now, so why is this necessary? I think both of those answers were right. Yes, ma'am.
Example, like when we get this, when we did get this church, when we got the church,
Mm-hmm.
that we had to give it back to God because it belonged to God.
There you go.
So that's part of our dedication in our life.
And it's dedicated towards the purposes of God, right? Yes, ma'am.
And online, we have to show thanks and appreciation.
There it is. Show thanks and appreciation. That goes along with what you were saying. So there are 4 parts of dedication that I believe. 4 parts. And these aren't action parts, but these are outward show, things that happen as a result of dedication. Number 1, dedication is an outward showing. It's almost like a baptism. You're showing publicly that this thing, this whatever you've built, is going to be for the glory of God. It's going to fulfill the purposes of God. And so those who are seeing the dedication, or those who know about the dedication, they know that, okay, this is for God's purpose. That's number 1. Number 2, I believe that dedication is an inward reference. It's a mile marker for you. I am dedicating this for God's purpose. Therefore, I should know, I should be able to protect, I should ensure that whatever I use this finished thing for is for the glory of who? God. For the glory of God, not for myself. Number 3, I believe it's a spiritual assignment of territory. Wrestle not against flesh and blood, right? So this is you putting your flag on something saying, this is for God. This building you were talking about when we dedicated this church, this place, this territory is for God. You're talking about your job. This job is for the glory of God. You're talking about your business. This business is for the glory of God. You're talking about your family. This family is for the glory of God. That's number 3. Number 4 is going to make y'all pause a little bit. Your dedication is temporary. We like to think, and we're going to deal with it. We like to think you plant this flag and we're done. And you may not believe that, but if you look at your life, it's true. We dedicate houses and say, this house is for God, and then we never go back and look and see, what can I do to actually put action towards that thing? We dedicate it, and then we turn our back on it, and then go live however we want to live. We dedicate a car and say, this car is for God, but if we look 5 years down the path and say, how many things did I actually do for God with that car? Nothing. So how are we going to dedicate something to God if we're not actionably taking any steps to use it for God? And if we're really honest and we look at all of the things we've dedicated in our lives, sometimes those have become the places where the most sin lives in our life, if you want to be honest. I mean, let's talk about it, right? We're going to dedicate a house for God, but then that becomes the thing that we so much care about that we keep people out of it. But we don't want them to be in our place. We don't want them to be in our sanctuary. So the place that we said that we're going to do God's work, we actually actively keep people out and away from it. So is that really living for God, or is that you turning your back on what God maybe had given it to you for? So are you living for God, or did you plant that flag, turn your back on it, and now walk in a different direction? We're going to dive deeper into that, but keep that piece in mind. All right, so dedication, here's an example. It's kind of like me buying a huge pack of cookies. Some Chips Ahoy cookies, some really, really good, soft, amazing cookies, putting them on a platter and leaving them on the coffee table in the house and walking away. If I just leave them on the table, what's going to happen? Everybody's going to eat them, right? He's going to eat them. He's going to eat them. The dog might come and grab some, right? And here's another thing. Desiree, she might, out of the best intention, say, well, why are these here? Pick them up, wrap them up, and put them somewhere else. But if I put those cookies down and dedicate them towards the dinner party happening in a few hours, now they have a purpose. And now if I say that, let's go back to our list of 4. If I do an outward show and say that publicly, hey, these are for the dinner party, don't touch them, there's a higher chance of them still being there, right? There's a higher chance of them still being used for what they were dedicated for because I made that outward show. You with me? Number 2, go back to our list of 4. First, dedication is an outward show. Number 2, dedication is an inward reference. Now, when I get hungry and I walk by these cookies, because I know and I've dedicated them towards that party, hopefully I don't go by and steal some because I know they're for the party, right? All right. Now, so if we look at that example, that's an example of a dedication, taking something and placing it aside for a specific purpose. You look like you have a question. Tell me what you're thinking.
No, I'm still walking with you.
Are you still walking with me? All right. So, outward show, hopefully the kids and the dog don't touch it because they've heard what this outward dedication is for. Inward reference is hopefully myself. When I get hungry, I'm not going to go steal these cookies. Spiritual assignment is the same as making sure that I set them aside for a specific purpose. Now, here's the temporary part. If I put them down there and I say the dinner party's going to start in 2 hours, everybody's going to be fine. Cool. You dedicated them for 2 hours. We're going to leave them for 2 hours. What happens when the next day comes and they're still sitting there? Daddy, can I have these cookies? Now, here's the part where it's temporary. Am I going to stand for what I dedicated them to? Or am I going to crumble and say, hey, you can have them? Does what I've dedicated this purpose for continue on? Or do I allow what I once said this purpose was for to go away? Maybe the dinner party got postponed to the next day. Do I still then say, no, these are still for the dinner party? Or do I say, they're just cookies, you can have them? And so that's where the temporary part comes in. You have to continue to make choices to keep what you've dedicated to ensure that it's for the purpose that it was set for. Here's maybe a better example. I have a pen, and and this is fake, this is fake. I bought this special pen to only write love letters to my wife. And I put it on my desk, and this is gonna be my love letter pen, right? Well, one day, I gotta sign a check. Well, I don't got a pen, let me use this pen, right? Okay, put it back in its place. And then one day I need to open up a can of paint. Well, I don't got nothing. Let me use this pen. Okay, she won't know. Let me put it back. All right, and then one day I actually do write a love letter, but then the next day, the kid needs to do something, and he uses it, and this goes on and on and on, and so on and so forth. What was once dedicated for a single purpose now has become watered down because what I thought and took it to be permanent is now temporary, and because I've now watered down the use of it, it's in a junk drawer somewhere and has no purpose for it. How many things have you dedicated at one point in time or another have become so watered down because what you once used to esteem as for God now serves every other purpose but for God, and you're so far removed from that temporary flag you put down that it doesn't even bother you anymore, where you take that love letter pen and sign your name on whatever it is. Yes, ma'am.
Perfect example for that is how we get married and we stand before God and we dedicate that this is what we're going to do. And as we go through life, it gets watered down and watered down.
There you go.
Because I mean, on your wedding day, before your wedding comes up, you're thinking, this is going to work. We're going to do this together. We're going to do that. But as you get in and you get into battles, it becomes easier and easier to water that love down.
There you go. Here's another example. I bought an iPad mini. I have this iPad that I use, but I went and bought another iPad mini, a smaller one, and that's literally the purpose of it is to write my prayers down. I don't have Gmail on it. I don't have messages on it. I don't have YouTube on it. It's literally only purpose in life is for me to write the prayers down. Now, I've dedicated it to that purpose, and I'm so serious about it that I ensure that nothing else is on it. So much so if a kid needs to use and wants to watch something, that's not even an option. It could be on my desk. I don't have a tablet up here because I don't see it as a tablet. It's a journal. Now, let's say one day I needed to get to an email and I installed Gmail on it and I forgot to delete it. Darn, I forgot to delete it. And then over time, he needs to watch a video, so I put YouTube on it. And over time, my wife needs to do something and I installed another app. How long until what used to be my prayer journal becomes just another tablet in the house? That's that flag I once planted that if I'm not careful and I don't recognize that dedication takes work to ensure that you remember and you live like it's dedicated, it can become like any other not dedicated thing. But we got to recognize that this dedication takes work. Not to say that God's anointing or God's spirit that you put over it needs work. No. God's going to do what God's going to do. Yeah. It's you that's the problem. Right. Are you going to remember what covenants you made? Are you going to remember what dedication you made and continue to live for it? You got your hand up, big man? Who's with me on that? Did that make sense? So, you have a question? Or no? All right. So, like I said, dedication is temporary, not because it didn't work, but because it requires us to continually work towards ensuring that it's being used for the purposes that it's being used for. Let's say that they built that temple, right? And they dedicated it to God, but over time, they died out, and they started selling groceries in the front door, and then groceries on the inside, and they started, selling a whole bunch of stuff. Oh, this is nice. They got high ceilings. I can sell really, really long pieces of wood. How long until what used to be dedicated towards God is just whatever it is. It's just like planting a flag. It's not you plant it and it's just going to be that way because you leave all the work up to God. No, no, no. God's going to do his part. But are you going to hold up your part and continue to revere it for God? Does that make sense? Yeah. All right, let's keep going. So number one was they had to celebrate. Number two was dedicate. Number three, offer. I'm gonna lose some of y'all on this one, but we still gonna go. We thought dedication was free, right? All right, let's see what the word says. Ezra 6, chapter 6, verse 17. For the dedication of this house of God, they offered 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 male lambs, and as a sin offering for all of Israel, 12 male goats, one for each of the tribes of Israel. I don't care what time frame you come from, what generation you are part of. That's a lot of stuff, right? Even if it was $1 for each one, even if you got a lamb or a goat for $1, that's a good amount of money. That's a good amount of value worth of things. And what they were dedicating was big and purposeful. And so it says that they offered something that was big and purposeful. Let's go to for the dedication. And what was the reason for it? It says, verse 17, for what? The dedication of the house of God they offered. And so the question for you is, when was the last time you were so appreciative of what God allowed you to finish that you were moved to offer something? But when was the last time that God had blessed you and you felt so much appreciation that you took your treasure and gave it back? See, a lot of times, and probably the first thing that you're thinking is, well, I give my time, or I volunteer, or, I play drums at the church, or I sing at the church, or I do these different things. But there's a reason why the only time we talk about volunteering is in a replacement for giving. You see, we ask about doing everything but giving what we cherish most. We say, oh, you want an offering for dedication. Well, what about my time? How about you take my time? Or how about you take my volunteering? Or how about you take my talent? All the while, we don't even recognize the posture that we're in, where we're holding back what's most cherished to us, our treasure. And maybe someone asked, or maybe some people ask with a true and a pure heart about doing these other things. But I believe, and I want to submit to you, that a lot of times when we're asking about these other ways to give, it's in a posture of, well, why don't you take this instead? Or why don't I give you this instead? Because we're holding what we truly treasure away from God. And so when we look at this dedication of this house, 100 bulls, 200 rams, 400 male lambs, and as a sin offering, as an offering in addition to it, as an offering serving a separate purpose, 12 male goats, they gave a lot because they got a lot. They lived without having a place to worship. Now they have it, and because of this, they are so appreciative of what God did for them that they gave. How much has God given you, but you are not willing to give even a portion back as to what he's given you? Yes, ma'am.
I think it's interesting. I've never thought of this before, but when it comes to sacrificing of animals, it's not just what you have, but what it took to get all of those things. Because if you think about these bulls, these rams, and the number of them, it took a lot of time for you to acquire these things because they had to be bred, they had to be born, they had to be raised up. And then after all of that, that's when you offer it. And so to think about how much value that held for people, it kind of brings that up a notch.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're giving goats and bulls and rams, it's not done in the anonymity that we get to do offering. Where we get up there and we crowd around the bucket and drop in whatever we feel. Like, you had to walk these 200 bulls, 200 rams, 400 lambs down the highway, down the road to go take them there. And so I think there was a sense of responsibility, almost a sense of almost public shame, if you will, of the culture just built into the culture of those times, based upon, well, you just got all this stuff from God, and God blessed you with all this, and you come up with 3 little rodents in your hand to give to God. I think that's a thing too. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, 2 points with that. And as you say, when you were taking these to be offered, people saw what you were given.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like, of course, you're going to take the best of the best. And then the second thing that kind of struck me, these people are given so much praise over this temple. This wasn't Solomon's temple. This was a lesser temple, but it
yeah.
was their temple.
Yeah.
And they still had so much esteem for this, the fact that they had a place to worship, even though it wasn't as, you know, beautiful as the first place that they had to worship.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you think about these 4 words I gave you, we went through all this stuff fast. Celebrate, dedicate, offer, then install. Their offering wasn't determined based upon who they installed as a preacher. Who was the pastor? They were so, and this goes to your point, they were so excited just to have a place to worship, just the building. Just this is where God is going to meet us. I don't care who you have in it. God's going to take care of that person. God's going to take care of making sure the right person is in there. But I'm celebrating for an empty building. That's a whole different level of appreciation. But because we have churches on every single corner, we no longer care that much about the building itself, care that much about having a place where we can worship. It's no longer that high on our list. But back in those days, having a place to worship, whether somebody in there was that you liked or not was in there, it's the fact that I'm coming to see God. Yes, sir.
Another thing that they probably didn't realize, every one of these offerings were mailed, which means it had a long range effect on them.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't just
Wait,
a
say that again?
one-time thing,
Say that again?
because they were all mail.
Yeah.
So they're giving not for right now, but they're giving long term, because you give up 100 bulls, that's 100 bulls minus production that you're going to get.
Yeah.
200 rams, 400 male lambs. Everything was capable of reproducing and replenishing their
Yeah.
flocks.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about that from an economic perspective, if you give a female lamb or a female animal, you know, they're going to be given, and if you think about them reproducing, there's a time period where they kind of out the game, right? But a male can just continue and continue and continue, and what used to be 200 can turn into 1,000 really quickly, just based upon them going around and doing what they've been called to do by God. But you're giving that to be sacrificed. You're giving these animals of the male variety. That's a great point. I never thought about that. That's a great point there. When we talk about giving value, giving treasure, I'm sure somebody said, well, why don't you just take the females? Because I'm going to keep the males in that same posture that we act like. But they said, no. Everything we give is going to be our best. And how many of us can say that when we look at how we give in response to what God has given to us?
And it costs me more in the long run than what you're seeing right now.
There you go. We think that when we give, we give out of our abundance. We give out of our extra. We get to the end of the month and then say, well, what do I got left to give God? Whereas God is asking us for is our best, our first. And this is an example of what they're giving. They're giving their best. They're giving the best of what they have to God. And I think that that's an example that we can certainly get a lot from following. Does that make sense, everybody? All right, so recap. Number 1 was celebrate. Number 2 was dedicate. Number 3 was offer. What's number 4? Install. So they celebrated the completion of the temple, dedicated it to the Lord with joy. For the dedication, going hand in hand with their dedication, they offered to God. And then finally, they installed priests for the service of God. You see, we are to celebrate what God has done in our lives and dedicate new territory to him for his purpose, but we're supposed to be about action and not words. We're supposed to back up our dedication with offering, and we're supposed to be about action, not about lip service. But I think this installation of priests is so important, and it's something that we just gloss over because we think, you got a temple, you're going to need some priests. You got a temple, you're going to need some holy people to be in there and to do stuff, right? But I think there's a lot within that we can use to govern our own life. This wasn't just a job that needed to be filled. This was something that was much bigger than that. Let me tell you what I mean. So, let me see here. If you're going to build a temple, you're going to need some priests, right? If you're going to build a church, you're going to need a pastor. If you're going to build a business, you're going to need some employees, right? And so what does a priest do in a temple? Anybody know? What's their job? What do they do? What did they do?
They minister unto God.
Minister unto God. Okay. What else did they do?
You asking me?
Yeah. Anybody? You think they pray? That's a good answer. They probably pray, right? What else did they do? Anything else?
They go to God on behalf of the people.
Go to God on behalf of the people. I love that answer. They do the work of God, right? They do what God has called them to do. They fulfill that purpose. My question for you, as it pertains to what you're finishing, what steps or activities have you put into your life to ensure that God's purpose for what you've dedicated to him, you said it was for God's purpose, what have you done to ensure that that gets accomplished? The temple has priests. A job has employees to make sure the work gets done. You have what? What did you do with whatever you finished in your life to make sure that where you placed your flag is still going to stay there? Or did you go just turn your back and go about doing whatever it is that you were doing before? But what changed about your life post this dedication moment to ensure that you weren't just putting that flag down in lip service, but you were actually going to work towards that thing? What did you do? What did you install in your life to make sure that that flag was going to stay planted there? What do you do?
If you dedicate their life like their business,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna use my business.
Okay.
So that's my dedication.
Okay.
That's my job. That's my goal. Although I know that I don't have the employees, so, but I dedicated, so I don't have to dedicate if I have to go by myself.
Okay. So you just said, and I'm just going to make it personal because you said, I'm dedicated. I'm going to go even if I have to go myself. That's your dedication to your job, or that's your dedication to your business, not your business's dedication to God. But what I'm trying to get us to is you said that you were dedicating this business to God. What are you doing to ensure that? What are you doing to make that happen? What are you doing to keep that flag there? You say you dedicated it. What does that even mean? Does that mean that you're going to do this business in a way that's pleasing to God? Does that mean that this is going to be your ministry unto God? And if that's the case, how are you ensuring that that's going to happen? Are you just hoping and dreaming that you're going to wake up and that job is going to be done? Are you just hoping and dreaming that one day the quality of it is not going to fall apart to a point that's not pleasing to God? How are you doing those things? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so for me, I have always said that my home was dedicated back to God.
Okay.
And so for us, when we have dinner parties, we always have this little awkward place where when I set the table, I use glass tables and or glass plates. And
The plastic's easier to clean.
people always say, well, no, I'll eat out of a paper plate. And for me, it's important that when they come to the house, because it's something that God has given us to, host people in, it's important for me that everything that I can do to the best of God is done. So we do the glass plates, and that's the one time that I use my dishwasher.
So let's unpack that, right?
Okay.
So she said she's dedicating her house to God. And it sounds like if you kind of dig into what she said, she lives out that dedication by inviting people over from time to time. And how she ensures that that continues to happen, how she ensures that she exercises one way of showing glory to God is by bringing out the nice dishes. Although it's going to be more difficult, although it's going to be less convenient, that's one thing that she does to ensure that that dedicated flag stays there, which is okay. But what I would challenge her to do is to say, if your dedication is bringing people over to the house, then how many times a year are you bringing people over to the house? What's the number? What's the number? What are you committing to? If you are dedicating to it, if you are dedicated to it, there should be ways that you can see whether you held up your end of the bargain or not. God blesses you to pay your bills, right? And how often do they get paid? Every month, on time, every time. And so if God can show up on time, if we are dedicating something to him, why would we be held to any less standard? So what I would challenge you to do is to say, if this is how you choose to exercise your dedication to God in this area, then figure out how you can do that consistently or in some way that continues to ensure that what once was a place where people can meet doesn't become forgotten in a place where you just stay to yourself. Does that make sense?
Online, to get the heat off, they have pray and serve.
There we go. So that's Teresa, pray and serve. So what I would ask you to do is if your dedication, if the dedication of whatever it is that you have dedicated or wherever you've placed that flag is to pray and serve. Okay, to pray, how often are you praying? Who are you praying for? And what is the frequency of that prayer that shows your dedication to whatever it is that you've dedicated it to? See, we like to throw around this word of dedicating and sprinkling some oil and now it's holy, but we forget that it's temporary. Because you can place this flag, and just as quickly as you put it down, you can turn your back and go back to your life and completely forget that you dedicated this thing to God. Let's be honest. Inviting people over to the house is nice and all for the hour that you're there, but the 3 hours I spend cleaning up after, So if we are left to our own devices outside of what God has called us to, if we're honest, it's easier for me not to invite you over than to invite you over and have to clean up the mess. And you know, we have great people and they help us clean, but you didn't help me clean up the 3 hours it took beforehand, before you got there, to make the house look decent, right? It's a lot more work to do those things. So what I'm saying is, if you're left to your own devices and life gets tough because it will, you get into the valley because it will, yes, you planted this flag with a very, very good and pure heart, but what's going to happen when life gets difficult? How quickly will you turn your back on that flag and turn your attention to life? But what I want to challenge you to do is to say, if we are going to finish building something and we want to be fertile ground where God continues to pour into us, God continues to plant seeds into us, we have to be able to be flourishing and producing ground consistently. Not just for the first week he gives us something, not just during the high parts of the mountain, but even in the valley, will you still honor this dedication? Even when things are difficult, are you still going to be dedicated? Even when things don't act right, when things don't work right, when your money is funny, are you still going to be dedicated to what God gave you? Or are you going to plant that flag, think it's permanent, and then go about your life trying to take care of every other thing and leave what you said was supposed to be God's? Let it end up being like that pen to write those love letters. And now I'm doing everything but the purpose it was supposed to be made for. Some of us may need to get some rededication in our life. We rededicate our lives to Christ. Maybe we need to go back and rededicate those areas of our life to Christ in which, if we're honest, we have not been good stewards over. Not because we didn't take care of it, but because we said it was God's and God is nowhere near it. We said it was for God, and God's purpose is as far away from it as the east is from the west. Maybe we need to go through our house and rededicate some things, because then we need to be honest in saying, yeah, I planted that flag, but is that still the flag that's waving? One more thing and I'm gonna come back to you. When you're talking about land and when no one's claimed it, no one cares about it, right? If there's no owner of a land, nobody really cares about it because it's just there. But the moment you go out there and plant this flag saying this is for God, now it goes from land to being territory. Now it goes from something that no one cared about, no one paid any attention to now saying, well, they just took over that land. Now I want that because you said that you had it. So what we got to realize is when we're out here dedicating stuff and out here being holy and planting these flags and sprinkling this oil, that when you plant that flag, you're taking what was once unassigned territory to now claiming it to a side. And you think that just God sees that, but your enemy sees that too. You wrestle not against flesh and blood, but of what? Principalities. And you just took some territory. So you think that just because you planted this flag and you think it's permanent, that somebody's not going to be trying to pull your attention away from doing what God asked you to do with it? Wow. You plant that flag and you say, hey, attack me. I'm here. I'm putting my foot down right here. And somebody said, okay, we're going to see how heavy your foot is. And then they just, as quickly as you planted that flag, swipe that out from under you. And because your back is turned and you're focused on everything else but this dedication you made to God, you don't even realize that behind your back is the flag of the enemy. Behind your back, what was once given to you for you to be able to speak life into people, for you to be able to give and to give to other people, you've now turned into an area or a monument of selfishness and being egotistical, because what God has given you to give to someone else, you said, is all mine, and I'm going to hold to myself. And you've turned your back to a flag that once was for God, but has been snuffed out and stolen from under your lips, and the flag has been changed. Yes, ma'am, you had your hand up.
I need you to address that up, what you was talking about my part. But what part did I miss other than praying about, pray about my business?
So you were talking about being consistent and dedicated to showing up to your job, showing up to your responsibilities, whether someone is with you or not. That's you being dedicated to getting the work done. I don't know. This is a decision you have to make for yourself. Is that you being dedicated to using your business for God? Like, how do you use, or how have you dedicated your business? Maybe your dedication was, I'm always going to show up, and that's going to be to the glory of God. Maybe that was your dedication. And if that's the case, then what you're doing is perfect. Or maybe your dedication was, every chance I get, every person I walk across, every broken person that I come into contact with, I want to share God with. Maybe that was your dedication. But whatever it is that when you planted that flag that you said that you were going to do, all I'm asking and reminding you to do is to be faithful to that thing. Whatever it is. Any other questions? I don't even know why I brought this tablet up here. It ain't been no help. Yes, ma'am.
It's not a question, but this one has really, really challenged me. I feel like there's a lot of rededication that needs to happen in my life, as well as, there's a lot of work that's required in order to do that. So, it is challenging, but I feel like now that I'm aware, like I can't not do it, or I can not do it, but I feel like there's consequences for knowing and not doing. So
I once heard someone say, I don't have a lot of friends, because friends are a lot of work. To be a good friend, like you can be a friend on Facebook and click the little check mark. But to be a real friend, to invest what you need in order to build a fruitful friendship with someone, I can't have a lot because it takes so much out of me. And so what I want to caution people to do is, rather than going around and rededicating yourself to everything, when you only got 2 seconds of life and time that's left to you, rededicate one thing. And do that amazingly to the glory of God. Yeah, God, you gave me all this stuff, but this one thing I'm picking out with your help, which you show me, I'm going to make sure this is fertile ground right here. And once I get this under my belt, then we're going to turn our attention to everything else. But this one thing is going to be something so much that if you even throw a seed out the window of heaven, we're going to catch it and we're going to grow that thing. Yes, ma'am.
And that's what David did. The one thing he praised, that's what he did.
There, wow.
He was
Yeah.
a man after God's own heart.
Think about that.
Yeah.
But the simplest way to rededicate everything back to God is to dedicate yourself. Give yourself to God, then you won't have a problem dedicating everything else in your life. And when you dedicate your business to
I
God,
know.
it's not about showing up to work on time. It's about being honest, upright, above reproach, doing everything that represents God.
That's why I love our church, because we got people that'll drop some wisdom on you in a heartbeat. And y'all online should have been here because you missed it. I'm kidding. But what Pastor was saying is that we're talking a lot about dedicating stuff and dedicating businesses and dedicating jobs. But what about starting with you? And if you dedicate yourself first, then would not everything else around you by virtue be dedicated? We're focusing on the peripheral, but what about what's inside of you? How many of us need to come down this aisle and say, today I'm making a new decision to renew my dedication to God and dedicating our whole self to his purpose? Any questions before we wrap up quickly? Because we got 5 minutes, y'all. We got to land the plane. Exactly. Any questions from our online church family? I don't see any up there. All right, thank you so much for joining us. Somebody talks a lot. I need to stop talking so much. But thank you so much for joining us for Sunday School. We're here each and every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. You only got 5 minutes today, so you can't catch a plane to get here to service. But you can definitely drive in your car if you're around town. And we look forward to seeing you here in the place at 11 a.m. Have an amazing morning if I don't see you between now and Sunday.